When Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, the world lost one of the greatest entertainers in history. Millions of fans mourned the loss of the King of Pop, a man whose music, performances, and creativity changed the world forever. But behind the headlines, behind the millions of fans, and behind the legendary name, there were three children who lost something much more personal. They lost their father. At that moment, Prince, Paris, and Bigi Jackson were no longer just the children of the most famous musician on earth. They were three young people who suddenly had to grow up carrying a name recognized by billions around the world. For years, Michael Jackson protected them from the spotlight, trying to give them a childhood away from the cameras. But after his death, the world became curious about one question: what happened to Michael Jackson's children? How did they survive life without their father? And how did three children raised inside one of the most famous families in the world build their own identities? This is the story of Prince, Paris, and Bigi Jackson. The lives they created after losing the man the world called a legend, but they simply called Dad. Before the world knew Prince, Paris, and Bigi Jackson as Michael Jackson's children, they were simply three kids growing up inside one of the most famous families on the planet. Michael Jackson understood fame better than almost anyone. He had spent his entire life in front of cameras, and he knew the pressure that came with being constantly watched. Because of his own experiences as a child star, Michael wanted his children to have something he never truly had: a more private and protected childhood. Unlike many celebrity children who grow up surrounded by media attention, Michael tried to keep his children away from the public eye. During public appearances, he often covered their faces with masks or coverings. While many people around the world questioned this decision, Michael explained that his intention was to protect their identities and allow them to experience a normal life without being recognized everywhere they went. Inside their private world, Michael was not just a global superstar. He was a father. Away from concerts, cameras, and headlines, he spent time with his children, creating memories that were completely different from the image people saw on stage. They grew up surrounded by a unique combination of privilege and isolation. They had access to a world most children could only imagine, but they also lived under the shadow of one of the most recognizable names in history. Their childhood was unlike any other. They were born into incredible fame. But Michael wanted them to understand that they were more than just Michael Jackson's children. He wanted them to have their own personalities, their own interests, and eventually their own identities. But that protection would change forever in 2009. When Michael Jackson suddenly passed away, the private world he had created for his children disappeared. The three children who had spent years away from the spotlight were suddenly placed at the center of global attention. On June 25, 2009, everything changed for Michael Jackson's three children. The world was shocked by the sudden death of one of the most famous entertainers ever. Millions of fans around the globe were mourning the loss of an icon. But for Prince, Paris, and Biggie, the loss was much more personal. They had lost their father. At the time, Michael Jackson's children were still very young. Prince was only 12 years old, Paris was 11, and Biggie, the youngest, was just 7 years old. For most children, losing a parent is already one of the most difficult experiences imaginable. But their grief happened under the eyes of the entire world. Suddenly, the private children Michael had spent years protecting became the center of international attention. People wanted to know everything. How were they coping? Who would take care of them? What would their lives look like without Michael Jackson? After Michael's death, their grandmother Catherine Jackson became their primary guardian, helping provide stability during one of the most difficult moments of their lives. But growing up without their father meant learning how to live with a unique challenge, carrying one of the most famous names in history while trying to discover who they were as individuals. The world saw them as Michael Jackson's children, but they had to figure out who they were beyond that name. Over the following years, each of them would take a different path. One would focus on continuing his father's humanitarian legacy. Another would step into music and entertainment while searching for her own identity. And the youngest would choose a much quieter life away from the spotlight. Their father left behind an unforgettable legacy. But the question remained, could his children create their own stories while living in the shadow of the King of Pop? Among Michael Jackson's children, Prince Jackson was the first to experience the responsibility of carrying his father's famous name. Born Michael Joseph Jackson Jr. in 1997, Prince grew up knowing that his life would always be connected to one of the biggest legends in music history. But after his father's death, that connection became even more significant. At only 12 years old, Prince lost the person who had guided and protected him. Suddenly, he had to grow up while the world was watching, not only as Michael Jackson's son, but as someone expected to represent part of his father's legacy. However, Prince did not choose to simply live in his father's shadow. Instead, he focused on creating his own path. While Michael Jackson was known for performing on stage, Prince developed an interest in the creative side of entertainment. He explored filmmaking, production, and storytelling, areas where he could contribute behind the scenes rather than trying to copy his father's career. But one of the biggest ways Prince has honored his father is through humanitarian work. Michael Jackson was known throughout his career for supporting charitable causes, and Prince has continued that spirit by becoming involved in projects focused on helping communities and supporting people in need. For Prince, carrying his father's legacy was not about becoming another Michael Jackson. It was about understanding the values his father believed in and finding his own way to continue them. Growing up as Michael Jackson's son came with opportunities, but it also came with pressure. Every achievement, every decision, and every public appearance would naturally be compared to his father. Yet Prince has repeatedly shown that his goal is not to replace a legend. His goal is to build his own identity while respecting the legacy left behind. Today, Prince Jackson represents a different side of Michael Jackson's story. Not the superstar on stage, but the father whose influence continued through his children. Among Michael Jackson's children, Paris Jackson's journey has been one of the most public and closely watched. Born in 1998, Paris was Michael Jackson's only daughter. From the beginning, her life was connected to one of the most recognizable names in the world. But after losing her father at just 11 years old, she faced a challenge that very few people could understand. She had to grow up while carrying the expectations attached to the Jackson name. For years, Paris lived a protected childhood away from the media. Like her brothers, she was shielded from public attention by Michael, who wanted his children to have privacy and experience life away from constant cameras. But after his death, everything changed. The private child the world barely knew suddenly became a person millions of people wanted to understand. As Paris grew older, she began creating an identity separate from being Michael Jackson's daughter. Instead of only being known through her father's legacy, she explored her own interests in music, acting, and modeling. Her journey was not always easy. Growing up as the daughter of one of the most famous entertainers in history meant that every decision she made received public attention. People often compared her choices to her father's career, while she was simply trying to discover who she was as an individual. In music, Paris developed her own style rather than attempting to recreate Michael Jackson's sound. Her artistic choices reflected her personal experiences, emotions, and perspective. This became an important part of her journey, proving that she was not trying to replace her father or copy his success. She was building something that belonged to her. At the same time, Paris has openly acknowledged the impact her father had on her life. For her, Michael Jackson was not just a global icon remembered by millions. He was her father, the man who raised her, the person whose absence shaped her life. Today, Paris Jackson continues working in entertainment while creating her own path. Her story represents one of the biggest challenges faced by children of famous parents, honoring where they came from while becoming someone of their own. While Prince and Paris Jackson eventually became more comfortable with public attention, Michael Jackson's youngest son chose a very different path. Born in 2002, Prince Michael Jackson II, who was later known as Biggie Jackson, spent much of his childhood away from the public eye. From the beginning, Michael Jackson was determined to protect him from the intense media attention that had followed the family for years. Unlike his older siblings, Biggie has always maintained a much more private life. After Michael Jackson's death, many people became curious about the youngest child of the King of Pop. They wanted to know where he was, what he was doing, and how he was handling life without his father. But Biggie did not follow the path many expected. Instead of becoming a public celebrity, he chose a quieter lifestyle. Growing up with the Jackson name meant carrying a level of fame that most people could never imagine. Every appearance, interview, or public decision could attract worldwide attention. For Biggie, staying away from the spotlight became a way to create a life based on his own choices, rather than public expectations. Over time, he developed interests outside of performing, including filmmaking and creative projects. Rather than trying to become another Michael Jackson, Biggie appeared more interested in exploring his own passions away from constant media coverage. His decision highlights something interesting about Michael Jackson's children. Although all three inherited one of the most famous names in entertainment history, they each responded to that legacy differently. Prince embraced parts of his father's humanitarian mission. Paris explored music and entertainment. Biggie chose privacy and independence. Their different choices show that Michael Jackson's children were never simply trying to continue a famous name. They were three individuals trying to understand who they were beyond being the children of a legend. And for Biggie, that meant choosing a life where he could exist as a person first, not just as Michael Jackson's youngest son. More than a decade after Michael Jackson's death, his three children have grown from protected kids into adults creating their own paths. Although they share the same father and the same famous last name, their journeys could not be more different. Prince Jackson has focused on building a life connected to creativity and helping others. Instead of following the exact path of his father as a performer, Prince has explored areas behind the scenes, including production and storytelling. Through charitable efforts, he has also tried to continue the spirit of giving that was an important part of Michael Jackson's public legacy. For Prince, honoring his father is not about becoming the next king of pop. It is about carrying forward the values he learned from him. Paris Jackson has taken a more visible path. As a singer, songwriter, actress, and model, she has stepped into the entertainment world while creating an identity separate from her father's name. Her biggest challenge has been proving that she is more than just Michael Jackson's daughter. Every project, every performance, and every personal choice has been viewed through the connection to her father. But over time, Paris has continued showing the world her own personality, artistic style, and voice. Then there is Biggie Jackson. Unlike his siblings, Biggie has remained mostly away from public attention. He has chosen privacy over fame, creating a life where he is not constantly defined by his father's legendary status. Three children, three different choices, three different ways of handling the same enormous legacy. Michael Jackson left behind one of the greatest musical careers in history, but his most personal legacy was the family he left behind. His children had to grow up with a name known by billions, while also trying to discover who they were beyond that name. And perhaps that is the most interesting part of their story. They were born into fame, but they spent their lives searching for something much more valuable, their own identity. For decades, Michael Jackson was known as the King of Pop. The world remembers his music, his performances, his records, and the moments that changed entertainment forever. But behind the legend was something much more personal. A father who wanted to give his children a life different from the one he experienced. Michael Jackson spent his own childhood under intense pressure and public attention. Because of that, he understood the importance of protecting Prince, Paris, and Biggie from the world he knew so well. After his death, his children faced a challenge no one could truly prepare them for. They had to grieve privately while millions of people watched their every move. They had to carry one of the most famous names in history while trying to discover their own identities. And that is what makes their story unique. They did not simply inherit Michael Jackson's fame. They inherited a responsibility. Today, Prince, Paris, and Biggie have each chosen different paths. One continues his father's values through creativity and charity. One has built her own career in entertainment, and one has chosen a quieter life away from the spotlight. Their journey proves that even the children of legends must find their own way. Michael Jackson left behind millions of fans around the world, but his most personal legacy was not a song, an award, or a record. It was the 3 children who continue carrying his memory forward. What do you think about Michael Jackson's children and the lives they built after his passing? Share your thoughts in the comments. For more deep documentary stories about the hidden lives behind the world's biggest legends, subscribe and stay connected.